My riverboat cruise started in Cincinnati, but I began my trip by taking Amtrak's Acela train from Boston to Washington, D.C., where I stayed at the Phoenix Park Hotel, a nice place just a short walk from the train station with a good view of the Capitol and a great Irish pub restaurant. The next day I had a late morning departure on Amtrak's Cardinal train to Chicago. That train stopped in Cincinnati around 1:30 in the morning. The Cardinal is one of my favorite U.S. trains, has great scenery and a very interesting route. This is a shot from my train's window of a train to Boston loading at the next platform. Now I'm in Cincinnati looking up at the Carew Tower. At 49 stories, it's the second tallest building in Cincinnati. I'm headed up to the top to their observation platform. This is the football stadium where the Bengals play with the Ohio River in the background. Kentucky's on the other side of the river. Coming into view now is the baseball stadium where the Cincinnati Reds play. More about them in a few minutes. This is the railroad bridge I came over last night on my way to Cincinnati's Union Terminal, which is the dome-shaped building in the background. After I came down from the Carew Tower, I had what I was told is a classic Cincinnati lunch. I went to the Skyline Chili restaurant for a Cincinnati chili dog, followed by a cone at a Grater's ice cream shop. Both of those places were near Fountain Square, which is across the street from the Carew Tower. Union Terminal is known as an example of Art Deco style. The main hall ceiling reminded me of old-fashioned jukeboxes. I easily spent 5 hours in this building and could have come back again the second day if I had time. There's a children's museum, which I avoided, a natural history and science museum, which is where I ran out of time, a railroad museum called Tower A, which is run by the Cincinnati Railroad Club, which you'll see a little bit more of in a minute. There's an Omnimax theater where I saw an interesting movie about lemurs, and a Cincinnati History Museum that includes one of the largest model train layouts in a museum in the United States. Cincinnati had a unique system of funiculars. Instead of enclosed cars that carried passengers, they had open platforms that carried horse-drawn wagons and electric streetcars up and down hills that were too steep for them to travel normally. This model depicts the Mount Adams Incline, which opened in 1876 and operated until 1948. Moving from model trains to real trains, Tower A is a railroad museum that shows how a busy railroad tower controlled the movement of trains, similar to how an airport tower controls the movement of airplanes. Also, there are observation windows looking out onto a working rail yard where my Amtrak train came into Cincinnati 2 nights ago. There was a lot of activity moving cargo containers around between trains and trucks that was all amazingly quick and efficient. On my last morning in Cincinnati, I went across the Ohio River to Kentucky and out on the Purple People Bridge. That's the longest pedestrian-only bridge between 2 states in the U.S. It opened as a railroad bridge in 1872 and became a pedestrian-only bridge in 2003. Next, I boarded the American Queen Steamboat for a week-long trip down the Ohio River and then up the Mississippi River to St. Louis. There was a ball game in progress at the Great American Ballpark, home of the Cincinnati Reds. The Reds were the first professional baseball team in the U.S., starting in 1869 as the Cincinnati Red Stockings. The American Queen smokestacks can be lowered to go under bridges. Those funnels are also called flutes. Some Riverlorians say that the term highfalutin came about because there was a time when only wealthy people traveled by steamboat, especially in the staterooms on higher decks near the high flutes. The American Queen has an authentic steam calliope. During the heyday of steamboats, most had a calliope to announce they were arriving at a town and to say goodbye when they left. Here we're leaving Louisville, Kentucky. There was a lot of barge traffic on the rivers. Most of the tows were 3 barges wide by 5 long, about the length of a modern aircraft carrier. Even though the barges are pushed by a boat, they call them tows because they used to be towed by horses walking along tow paths on the sides of canals. There were several dams along the river, and we passed one that was under construction with a temporary lock so we could go around. The Finnish dams had flood control gates across most of the river with a lock on the side for boats and barges. Our riverboat was quite the photo attraction going down the river, with lots of people stopping their cars and jumping out to take pictures. The American Queen is modeled after an old-time riverboat with a large paddle wheel driven by steam for propulsion. You can see the linear motion of the white piston being translated into circular motion of the paddle wheel. Passengers were welcome to go down to the engine room and stand behind a railing. You can see the old original gauges next to the new computer control system, and the other end of the white piston driving the paddle wheel. At some of the ports, passengers could sign up for a guided tour of the wheelhouse while we were docked. A great book to read before a river trip is Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi. That gives you a good idea of how different piloting a boat was back in the 1800s. The salon area of the boat had a lot of period furnishings. This is a shot of the card room. It's empty because most people were outdoors in the porch area when we were cruising during the day. This was one of my favorite sights. And the porch areas were nice places to sit to watch the moon come up in the evening. Many of the red and green navigational markers along the river were not lighted, but they were made of reflective material. At night, the crew could keep a powerful spotlight aimed at each marker and then move the light to the next one as they progressed along the river. They always seemed to have one of the markers in sight. Night was also time to gather in the ornate theater for a lot of varied entertainment. Paducah, Kentucky is where the Tennessee River joins the Ohio River. I saw an interesting commute to work here. Check out the dog, who seems to be pretty familiar with this process. As people start to board, you can see that the dog has moved from shore to the bow of the boat. But sorry, you gotta move down out of the way. Okay, now you can reclaim your rightful place as you head out to Owens Island, where the Ohio River is on the left, the Tennessee River comes in on the right, and several barge companies are located where your fellow passengers are headed out to work. Now I've made it to the end of the Ohio River and turned right to head north up the Mississippi River. Missouri is on my left and Illinois is on my right. Cape Girardeau has murals painted on their flood control walls that depict the history of the area. Like many of the old-time steamboats, the American Queen doesn't need to dock at a pier. The ship has a long ramp on either side of the bow that can swing out on ropes and be lowered to the shore wherever the river has a suitable landing spot. Then crew members haul the mooring lines up the bank and secure them around bollards. When the boat is secured in place, the ramp is lowered to shore and ready for use. And a local jazz band was on hand to welcome us ashore. One of Cape Girardeau's landmarks is the well-preserved old Coca-Cola advertising sign. From Cape Girardeau to St. Louis, there were great views of limestone bluffs with lots of caves and other designs. And there were some unique formations along the bluffs. There had been some heavy rains off to the west along the Missouri River that were causing the Mississippi River to rise rapidly. We had to skip one port and run at high speed before the river got so high that we wouldn't be able to fit under a bridge near St. Louis. Our port at St. Louis was Alton, Illinois, and that ended the riverboat cruise. In St. Louis, I boarded Amtrak's Texas Eagle for a 6-hour run to Chicago. Approaching Chicago, there was a good view of the Willis Tower, also known as the Sears Tower. At Chicago's Union Station, I boarded Amtrak's Lakeshore Limited. That overnight train splits in Albany, New York, and one section goes to Boston on a very scenic route through the Berkshire Mountains. There was a rest stop in Buffalo where passengers could stretch their legs until the conductor called all aboard.